Well, we'll call the meeting to order here, the quarterly commission meeting for the Pennsylvania Commission on Sentencing. We'll start with a public comment period. Mark, do you want to just review for folks how they will deliver a public comment if they're interested in being recognized?
Sure, thank you. So first, let me remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded and also transcribed. So it's very important that when anyone speaks that they first indicate their name and then proceed with the comments or the questions. During the public comment period, Ryan Myers will be checking in with anyone who has been registered for the meeting and wishes to speak. You should use your hand raising or other kind of feature to indicate that you have an interest in speaking. Ryan will then recognize the person. The person will state his or her name, and please limit your comments to 3 to 5 minutes. And then Ryan will close you out, and any other person he'll unmute, allow to speak, and so forth. So with that, how about if I ask Ryan if we have anyone who has indicated they're interested in speaking and to start the process.
Well, thank you, Mark, and Representative Stevens. It appears we have at least one at the moment. Nisa Taylor has her hand raised, and as Mark indicated, Nisa, we will unmute you. You will have to then unmute yourself, and you'll have 3 to 5 minutes.
I just have a question. Are we able to see them, or because I think I only see commission members and a handful of staff members? Will we get to see who's speaking? Oh.
No, you won't be able to see the video.
Okay. All right. Well, I see a big N for Nisa. I know what she looks like, so that's fine.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I don't actually have public comment. This is Nisa Taylor from the ACLU of Pennsylvania. I have a question, and it relates to the parole recommitment guidelines. I am wondering how that will work with the statutory parole setbacks that are currently used by state parole. And so sort of what the interplay between the statutory setbacks are going to be with the recommitment guidelines.
So, Mark, do you want to, I know we typically don't, do you want to see if you can offer some guidance there? Do you have any thoughts?
Sure, thank you. Hi, Nisa.
Hi.
Clearly statutes supersede the guidelines. So any recommendation we made is within the framework of any kind of requirements of statute. So if the board is required to impose some kind of set back time based on statute, that would supersede the guidelines. So the guidelines would only apply where there's no, not necessarily any other bar to that action.
And then obviously this is something that, as we're going to have public hearings on this, right? So this is something that certainly folks could dig in a little deeper on and offer testimony to, and, we can certainly be responsive through that process as well. Did you have anything else, Nisa, or was that?
No, that was it. Thank you so much. And thank you for offering this opportunity for us to be here and to make public comment as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan, are there any other individuals?
At this time, I do not see any other hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Chairman?
I would just like to, just want to start off the meeting. There's obviously a great deal of conversation, concern, and unrest across Pennsylvania and frankly across the nation, understandably and justifiably so, based on the horrific conduct that we've witnessed in Minneapolis and elsewhere. And as a commission on sentencing, we are an integral part of the criminal justice system, and I think it's incumbent upon us to ensure that we are looking at the policies that we are implementing and also looking at the policies that other criminal justice agencies across this Commonwealth are implementing, and how they may be impacted by race. And I think that that's an important component. I did ask Mark the other day, for some ideas and thoughts for us to really move this subject to the forefront as we pursue a rework of the guidelines with the 8th edition that we are about to embark upon. And a lot of these issues are not new for us. They were raised very well by folks during the public hearings on the risk assessment project, and frankly, voiced by many members of the commission currently and previous members who are no longer on the commission. And so these are issues that we continue to work on, and we obviously have more work to do, and we'll keep working there. But I wanted to make sure that the members of the commission know that I do think that this is really critical work for us, and I think that we have an important role to play. Obviously, our data is used, has recently been used just this past February in Allegheny County, to identify racial concerns or concerns of racial bias in the criminal justice system. And I think it's important that we continue to, serve that role, but I think that there's a broader role for us as well. And I've already reached out to a couple commission members, and I was going to reach out individually to each of the members just to see if anyone has any thoughts on ways that we can, through the work of the commission, improve outcomes and reduce, hopefully eliminate any racial bias inherent in our criminal justice system here in Pennsylvania. So I just wanted to make the members aware that I am going to be reaching out to each of you for any thoughts that you may have. You can always, of course, call or email me because I think it's important that we, we do all we can to address these issues moving forward. Mark, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add in that regard.
Yeah, just I guess one comment or echoing two of the things you raised. One is, on sort of the technical side, the data collection. Over the history of the commission, data is boring, but it's really important when we're trying to set policy or understand, what happened or what is happening. And so back in the 90s, the commission started aggressively to partner with academic institutions to do research on race and sentencing, and not just race, ethnicity, gender, age, and others. And I think it's, as the chairman said, it's really important that we continue to do that because you need good information to make good policy decisions. And I think, that's one contribution the commission has made, and we should continue to make it. But getting to the other point that the chairman made in terms of policy and actions by the commission, my sense over the last 4 or 5 years as we've been working on this 8th edition rebuild of the guidelines, a lot of the attention has been focused on the prior record score. And I think not only our research, but research by the Robina Institute, other national research entities have said, that's really a point that deserves a lot of effort and a lot of sensitivity because, there could be legacy issues in terms of arrests and convictions and other things like that build up a prior record score that never go away. And so I think the commission's efforts to understand and try to figure out the right role for the prior record score, and also to understand the role of criminal records and of that kind of information, I think is really important. And I think we could see substantial changes in that area. So I just echo the chairman's comments and really hope that we think of a way where we can obtain, information and feedback from the public as we did with the risk assessment. It was a tough process, but we learned a lot. We gained a lot. We have a better policy because of that public process, and I hope we can do the same in trying to look at this. Thank you.
All right. Did any of the other commission members have any comments or thoughts before we move
Yeah,
forward?
this is Judge Tucker. Yes, I agree wholeheartedly, and a lot of what the commission does is done through staff, and I think the staff should be more diverse. I'll just have to be blunt about it. the staff must be more diverse. The effect that this commission has on the citizens of our Commonwealth and the amount of people that are of minority that comes through the things that the commission handles, I think everyone must agree that the staff must be more diverse because of the effect, again, that it has on the citizens of the Commonwealth and the individuals that are sentenced by the courts in this Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank
It's a
you.
great point, and certainly something that we need to undertake for sure. Thank you, Judge. Any other commission members like to be recognized?
Dave Sunday.
Yeah, go ahead, DA.
I just want to echo the statements of both yourself, Representative Stevens, and Judge Tucker. I think that, and I don't know, I'm new to the commission, and so I'm sort of working my way through it, going backwards and reading prior meeting minutes and doing my homework. It's taken a lot of time. However, one of the things I don't know if the commission would consider discussing maybe a diversity and inclusion statement or something of that nature. I think that would probably go a long way, considering the tremendous impact that this body has on the justice system. And I'm just throwing that out there for purposes of discussion. That's something I certainly would entertain.
That's a terrific idea. Certainly something we can follow up on, and I think that's a terrific idea as well. Any other commission members have any thoughts or comments?
Representative McClinton's hand is up.
Okay.
Good
Yeah,
morning,
just-
everyone.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, John. I just want to let everyone know, I can't see whose hand's up, so I'm relying on Mark and Ryan for that, so I apologize.
I thought you were ignoring me like usual, Todd. I called you,
come
you
on.
didn't answer. This is State Rep Joanna McClinton for the record. Thank you for having a discussion on what's going on nationally. Certainly it hits home in Pennsylvania when we look at just numbers alone of who's currently incarcerated in the Department of Corrections. We have an overpopulation of people of color. And when we look at the way the policies we create affect communities of color, it is all, interrelated. It's not one issue. It's not an issue of police brutality. It is an issue of so many systems that have been racist towards people that look like me for centuries, whether we're talking about the justice system or whether we're talking about access to the ballot or whether we're talking about the ability to earn a living wage. When I see young people in my community marching the streets in the middle of a pandemic, raising their voices, it's because of all of these issues. It is certainly about George Floyd, but not exclusively. There's every issue that's been boiling up during 100 days stuck in the house that is prompting people to lift their voices and look at leaders like yourself, Chairman, and those on this call who make up this committee to take actions that are more considerate, that are more thoughtful, and that are more inclusive. And I agree with the earlier comments about from our staff to even the makeup of our commission members that we need to have a diverse group of people who have their voices shared in this commission. I know that currently I'm the only person who was a former public defender and the only African-American woman currently. I know that wasn't the case just a few months ago, but we have to continue to make, strides, actions, and real steps. Like, it's wonderful to discuss these things and to brainstorm. And I wonder if there could be some sort of committee, but I think that even many of the people, at least when I'm physically present at the public comment, represent a diverse community often when they're sharing their thoughts and their feedback on the policies that we are implementing that have a direct influence on the lives of many Black and Brown people across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So thank you for your leadership and even allowing us to have a space to talk about this. And I look forward to the action that we'll take throughout 2020.
Look forward to working with you on it. Anyone else have any comments or thoughts they'd like to share?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do.
Sure. Go ahead, Senator.
Look, first I want to again thank everyone for opening up this forum to have for comments in this regard. Look, the work we do around criminal justice reform is important to all communities, but is even more significant often in communities of color, particularly the African American community, where disparities of folks coming through the system are just a lot higher. We are more likely to be victims, and we are more likely to be defendants. And so getting this right is important. The reality is that the African American community does need appropriate measures to keep it safe, but we cannot have a system where where people don't have confidence in those of us, whether we're policymakers, like we are judges who sit on this committee, administrators, or in fact, law enforcement. And the part of what you're seeing is all the frustrations that Representative McClinton pointed out, along with just an overwhelming frustration that and feeling that the system doesn't respect or reflect them. And the ultimate manifestation of that was watching people who are supposed to be sworn officers of the law murder a Black man on camera, as those 4 officers did to George Floyd in Minnesota. It's unconscionable, and it is upsetting. But when all that happens in the midst of a pandemic that is increasing attention to, and both from people on the outside, but certainly people in the community, of all the other inequities that exist in our society because of the historical challenges. When you have a stay-at-home order, and your house has a big backyard, and your house has a bunch of rooms, and you have a game room and a pool table and a bunch of those things, that's one thing. When the average row house in my district is 16 feet wide. Most people live one family per floor. So there's a reason that I have a Senate district that you can walk across in a couple of miles, while other people have Senate districts that take a couple hours for you to drive across. It is because the density is higher, people have less space, people have less resources, and in fact are just consuming less of the Commonwealth's resources. And when you confine people to those spaces, it has an effect. And people often don't think about it because you go about your life, but when you're confined to that space, you have to think about it. When you need access to healthcare and you live in a community and now it's critical, and you realize that the hospital waiting room that was always overcrowded, now you're worried because you're not supposed to be in a crowded space. So going to the hospital emergency room is in fact making you medically vulnerable, so you have to avoid hospitals. Those kinds of things add to tensions and anxieties. And I think the thing that we can do in this space as a commission is to work to make sure that people understand and believe that we are trying to make the system better. Most Black people are realistic and understand that the system didn't get unfair overnight, and it may not become fair overnight, but people get really upset when they see us going in the wrong direction and not the right direction, because that is intolerable for too many. I've been pleased by what went on the original peaceful march, by how diverse it was, particularly young people. I will say candidly, I have evidenced a level of respect and concern amongst many of the young millennial white marchers and social justice advocates that I've never seen in prior generations in that volume, not saying that there are no individuals. And it is encouraging when young people are as concerned for others. These are clearly people who are not impacted. You have young white kids holding up signs that say Black Lives Matter. We must stop the killing of Black and brown children and babies. And they are blonde haired and blue eyed. And it is encouraging that that generation seems to understand, as Dr. King pointed out, we're all caught up in a web of mutuality, which makes us interconnected, and that injustice to anyone is an injustice for everyone. And so I would submit that this all highlights the work we're doing, and that we have to make things fair. And I like my colleague, a little disappointed that the commission, when we reconfigured it, became a little less diverse, but I'm encouraged that we still have an opportunity to create more equitable policies going forward. And again, thank the chair and the members for this opportunity to talk in this way, and thank the staff for their continued diligent efforts to really create a platform for us to have these discussions and to give us fair and unbiased data.
Thanks so much, Senator. I appreciate it, and look forward to working with you on these issues for sure.
I look forward to working with you, Mr. Chair, as well.
Thanks. Any other comments by any other members? All right. Well, moving on then to the next item on the agenda, approval of the minutes of the last quarterly meeting, which was on March 5th. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from March 5th?
This is Judge Bernstein. I'll motion to approve the minutes.
All right,
Judge Tucker, I'll second it.
All right. It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes from March 5th. Are there any negative votes? All right. Hearing none, the motion passes. Move on to executive, administrative, and financial. Just a quick comment. I think this is the right spot for the comment, Mark. But I mean, you've just, working through the COVID-19 issues, the budgetary issues, at the same time keeping the commission, moving forward, has just been terrific work. So thank you for all that you and the staff have done to really work through very difficult and challenging times.
Well, thank you very much, and on behalf of staff, it's been a group effort, and we hope to tell you a lot about it today during the meeting. So let me just start by sort of going through these bullets, try to move through this pretty quickly. Regarding commission members, I guess I should say as background, all of you received several documents, and again, thanks to staff for compiling all of this and getting it out to members. And these are all posted on our website for the public as well. But the one document we call the Commission Notebook Materials, which is sort of highlights of all the materials. So if you have that or you have a screen of that, that's sort of what we'll be tracking through for this meeting. And then if that's not enough, we have the comprehensive packet of materials called the Supplemental Commission Materials, all, 500 pages of it. So that's available as well as sort of background. And then on the commission website, just to make it a little bit easier to get to, we've posted individually the 4 main proposals that the commission will be voting on today in terms of approving for public hearings. So those documents are out there and available. I'll be working primarily from the commission notebook and more importantly from these slides that Ryan is posting. So hopefully you have all the material you'll need to make decisions along the way. So with that, in the materials, one of the things that we provide, as we always do, is a list of all the commission members and then of the committee compositions. And, we've gone through a strange time and we're still not back to normal, but we do, staff really benefits from input from commission members. And we've tried to set up the structure of the committees that there's in effect, an oversight committee for each of the staff units, and that we hope to have the staff members in that unit and that committee meet by phone or Zoom or whatever kind of mechanism, meet remotely midpoint between the commission meetings, because that not only keeps those members up to speed in terms of sort of knowledge about that specific part of the commission operations, sort of oversight of staff, but also there are times when staff runs into questions and really needs just an outside informed voice about what direction to go. So those meetings are particularly helpful to the unit managers and the units. And as we try to, get back in line, I'm going to ask the unit managers to be reaching out to the chairs of the committees and try to see if we can, organize or reorganize or reinstitute those phone calls or Zoom meetings because it's really helpful for what we do. So thank you to the members, and it's an important role. I also wanted to open up the opportunity if members are available from our ex officio agencies. So the Department of Corrections and the Pennsylvania Parole Board are ex officio agencies and members of the commission. And I'm going to refer to Ryan in case either the secretary or a designee from DOC and the chairman or a designee from the parole board is available for a comment.
Mark, at this time, I'm not seeing anybody indicating.
Okay, that's fine. But we work really closely with both agencies and appreciate all their efforts. Moving on to the next issue, which is commission staff. We have one departure during the past quarter, Melissa Parks, who was a research analyst, data analyst. We now have 3 vacancies that we plan to keep open in the short term until we have a resolution of the budget. I've taken to heart the comments that were made previously regarding staff diversity, and we have had this discussion many times in the past, and I really appreciate Senator Street and his staff's effort over time to really try to help us look for candidates and so forth. But we have not done well in this area. As you know, we try to post positions widely, but we go through Penn State because of our MOU with Penn State. But we have 3 positions that are vacant, and when we get to the point where we are looking to post and fill those positions, I really hope the commission and I look to the members that spoke can help us to really find a way to have a bigger pool of candidates and really think about diversity as a priority in those hires. So keep in mind, we have 2 offices. We're now all getting really good with Zoom, and there's the opportunity to think about both the Harrisburg office and the University Park office as places where people can work, and that we're even working remotely. So I think if there's a silver lining in what we've been through the last quarter, it's we're all getting much better at working remotely and thinking sort of outside of traditional office buildings and things like that. So I really look forward to talking to some members and working with people to try to figure out how we can address the diversity issue. I think it's a critical issue and we need to do way better. So we have an opportunity moving forward.
Hey, Mark.
So, yes.
I'm sorry, it's Todd. Todd Stevens, for the record. Just real quick, when you say you post those, where do they get posted, those positions?
So let's take an example of Ryan's unit, where we have education outreach specialists. So these are people that we're looking for with background and working in court systems and education, that kind of thing. So all of the staff positions at Penn State are Penn State employees. That's part of our MOU through Penn State. So we leverage Penn State for HR and for hiring and all of that. So whenever we develop a position, when we post a position, we post it through Penn State. And remember, Penn State's just not State College. It's it's statewide and national. And so the system of posting really is intended to make sure that it's available broadly like that. But because people don't normally think about going to a Penn State website to apply for a position with the commission, we also make sure that we make that information available on our website, and then we share that information with entities that sort of have a good fit for that. So, for instance, when we're posting probation in a position in Ryan's unit for education and outreach, we send a notice to all county probation and parole offices and to other entities like that to try to spread the word. And so that's where in the past, I've had discussions with Senator Street's staff and others about, are there other things we can do? Are there other people we can notify? And I think we have to do just way more in that area. And then if you think about the positions that we have vacant, when we get to a point where we'd be posting, I think we're going to have 3 different types of positions out there. So one is a vacancy around this whole communications plan that we've talked about. The second is a data analyst position. And the third is more of a research analyst position. And so, it's fairly technical, specific skills we're looking for, but, we just need a better way to think in a much more diverse way and have a bigger pool of people applying through that portal that's available. So sorry for the long answer, but that's sort of the approach that we take.
All right, thank you.
Sure. So moving on with other factors, management and oversight, let me just make a comment briefly about COVID-19 and the agency response. And I appreciate the comments. And again, it was an incredibly positive group effort. When the commission, we think in Penn State terms sometimes, and we were coming off spring break when the university was thinking about whether they were going to reopen. And it occurred that I think it was on March 13th, that was a Friday, during that week, I was meeting with staff and with unit managers to think about, what was our response? How are we going to prepare for this thing that may happen, or the university closing down? And we had to think that we have 2 offices, right? We have the University Park office and the Harrisburg office, which is in the Capitol complex through an MOU with the House of Representatives, and we're a legislative agency. So it was trying to balance a lot of things, trying to think about us fulfilling our duties because we're remaining in business, but thinking about a different way to do it, and also thinking about the safety of our staff because we didn't know what was happening or what was going to happen, and trying to think about how could we provide an opportunity for people to work in a place that they were comfortable with, and then how did we make that happen in terms of technology and access to servers and all of those other things. And so I just credit our staff with really helping to think through all the details of this and put in place a temporary policy that would allow people to start working remotely, and then working on making sure we provided laptops or computers or other kind of VPN connections, things like that, just to sort of the nuts and bolts of this and putting it in place. And I thank the commission for being supportive of these quick turnarounds on some policies to put that in place. So we started that on March 13th in terms of making it available to all staff. And I think about half the staff took advantage of that, starting the following Monday. By the end of the next week, we were closed down. I mean, in terms of not accessing offices, everything had to be remote, forwarding phones, using email, Zoom. We've gotten so good at Zoom. I just wanted to recognize everyone for all of their efforts, and also our coordination with other legislative service agencies to sort of figure out what they're doing and what are best practices, with the university, with the House and the Senate. It's just been a really positive experience during a very difficult time, and staff has been incredible. And let me just mention one thing, and Matt may talk more about these things later, but one of the things we put in place was we wanted to make sure that we were still productive, that we were doing our job. And so we had a retreat in January where we came up with sort of a game plan for the year in terms of specific duties that link to our enabling legislation. And we went back to that and asked that each unit manager sort of track activities during the week. And at the end of each week, just report to Matt and I, like, what have they done? What are sort of objective things? And it's amazing and incredible how productive staff has been throughout this process. So Matt can talk more about that later, but it's been a really good process, and I appreciate you giving me the time to talk about that. let me hit a couple of other quick issues and then we'll get to some voting stuff. NCIC Triple RI access. This is in the weeds, but more than 10 years ago, I worked with my counterpart in Virginia and with Congress to enact legislation that gave state sentencing commissions access to federal criminal history information. And for the past 10 years, we have not had that access. So it seemed like the legislation was a lot of work. We got it enacted through Congress, and then we just didn't have access to the data. And over the course of the last couple of months, and working with other state sentencing commissions, we were able to sort of navigate the process and figure out a pathway where staff can now have direct access to federal and other state records, so NCIC and III access. This is incredible in terms of, as we think about the 8th edition of the guidelines, as we think about more automation of the guidelines so that there's less work on end users and it's more automated. This is an incredible advance. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Sometimes things take time, right? But 10, 15 years. But anyhow, glad to have it. It was a wonderful thing. You're going to hear about some other things in terms of general, improving our communication with the community. You're going to see a lot of work that's been done during this in the last couple of months. But the commission approved a communications plan, a contract with a vendor to at least help us develop a communications plan and refresh our website and do a lot of things like that. That's been disruptive, but we've done some little things in the interim, and we do hope that in the near future we'll be able to reconnect and work on that communications plan. And then, as I said, one of the concrete connections to that communication plan is a communications specialist working with the commission, and that's where I think we have some opportunities to think about staffing at the commission. The final thing, I'm going to turn to Professor Mistick, a case called Raymond Brown v. General Assembly, Commission on Sentencing, and Department of Corrections.
At the conclusion of this meeting, I'll be asking the chair to reconvene in executive session so that we can discuss 2 litigation-related matters. One of them is Raymond Brown versus the General Assembly, Pennsylvania Commission on Sentencing, and the Department of Corrections.
Thank you, Professor. So at the end of the formal meeting today, we're going to ask all members to stay on the line, and we'll close off the meeting to everyone else, and then we'll have a brief executive session for Professor Mistick to brief us on this matter. Thanks, Professor. We're going to move to financial issues. And so in the materials that I provided, we break out 3 fiscal years. Let me just tell you the first thing is fiscal year 18-19. We have a financial audit underway right now. We do this every year, an independent financial audit. It's been delayed a little bit because of COVID-19, but we anticipate that the report and findings will be available for the commission for the September meeting. So that is underway. The second thing, in terms of the current fiscal year 19-20, we have, one of the things about the COVID-19 experience has been that our operating costs have dropped dramatically. We're not, I usually travel 500 or 700 miles a month, and I'm down to 0. So that's, saving money. Ryan does a lot of travel. We have a lot of operating costs, and those are de minimis now. And so we expect to end the year with a cash balance in the neighborhood of maybe $280,000. And so that's helpful because we'll talk about the next fiscal year and that rolling over to help buffer our budget. But what we provided to you in the materials is the current operating expenses and the original budget that was adopted. We're going to move some things around, and then, like I said, take advantage of that cash balance as a reserve or as used for the next fiscal year. So we're looking for a motion to just approve the details of the current operating budget as provided in the materials to you.
So initially, you're talking about the modifications to the current budget.
Yeah,
right?
modifications to the current budget, yes.
Okay. All right. So is there a motion is there any discussion on the issue? Is there a motion? Oh, go ahead, Judge.
I'll make the motion.
Okay. So Judge Dowling moves to approve the modifications to the fiscal year 2019-2020 operating budget as proposed in the materials. Is there a second?
Judge Tucker, I'll second.
All right, great, Judge Tucker. Any other discussion on this? Are there any negative votes? All right, hearing none, the motion passes.
Great, thank you. Moving on to the upcoming fiscal year 2021, I'm sure you're all aware that the General Assembly adopted and the governor signed a 6-month or actually a 5-month budget. But what the commission is, the commission had recommended a funding of $2.68 million. Our baseline budget was $2.5 million, and that was prorated for 5 months. So the appropriation that was approved was $1,064,000. That's for 5 months at the current level. As I said, that along with the carryover funds that we've identified and some funds in reserve give us confidence that we can at least provide to you a proposed budget for the first 6 months of the new fiscal year, so July through December. And then during the September or December meeting, the commission can take a second look at what's happening for 2021. So we would need a motion just to adopt as an operating budget the current, basically the current operating budget for the next 6 months.
All right.
So moved.
Who was that? Was that Judge Marsico?
Yes, Don.
Oh, look at that. Good guess. All right. Is there a second on the motion to approve the fiscal year 2021 operating budget?
I'll second.
I'll second that.
Is that Professor Rego first? Is that what I heard?
Yes.
All right, great.
Sorry.
All right. It's been moved and seconded to approve the fiscal year 2020-2021 operating budget. Are there any negative votes? Hearing none, the motion carries.
Great, thank you. The next item is what's called a service purchase contract. As I said, we have an MOU with Penn State where we work most of our operating expenses and structures through Penn State. And the process we have is that we bill things through Penn State, salary, other things like that, and then they invoice us at the end of the month, and then we use our Commonwealth account to pay that invoice. So that's the structure. And the way we build that is we enter into a contract for a fixed period of time with a maximum amount. So based on that, at least for the Penn State service purchase contract, we're asking for approval for a contract not to exceed $1,150,000 for the 6-month operating budget of the commission.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the service purchase contract with Penn State?
So moved.
All right. DA Sunday, is there a second?
I'll second. Move us
All
along.
right. Thanks, Judge Bernstein. All right. It's been moved and seconded to approve the service purchase contract with Penn State University. Are there any negative votes? All right. Hearing none, the motion's approved.
The next budget item is a service purchase contract for legal services, and I'll turn to Professor Mystic.
Yeah, I'd like the record to reflect that I'm leaving the room for the duration of this discussion, and I suspect that if it's so desired, Ryan will invite me back when it's over. In a while.
We'll see. It was nice talking to you.
Thank you, Professor Mystic. So we have a service purchase contract for legal services. The contract is generally for a 1-year period, and it's generally in the amount of $40,000 based on quarterly payments of $10,000. If there are other legal services above and beyond that, the commission can entertain an invoice for other payments, but that's a sort of a rare event. So I'm recommending that Professor Mystic be continued as for legal counsel, for a 6-month period for an amount of $20,000, $10,000 for each quarter.
So
All right.
moved. Ally.
So I think, was that Senator Street who made the initial motion?
Judge Dally.
Oh, I'm sorry. All right. Judge Dally made the motion to approve a service purchase contract for Professor Mystic in the amount of $20,000. Is there a second?
Second.
Tucker, I'll second.
I heard Representative McClinton, I think, right? All right.
Yes.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any negative votes? All right, motion passes.
Well, thank you for that. Professor Mystic has been, incredibly helpful throughout the years. We did indicate that if he actually had a contract coming up, Ryan would contact him by text to have him rejoin the meeting. But we don't want to rush into that. So, it's your call, Mr. Chairman, when we text the professor, but he can rejoin us.
I mean, I feel like, I'd love to keep him waiting, but we gotta keep things rolling. So we'll get him back on here and we'll keep moving forward.
All right. Thank you. And thanks, Ryan, if you could contact him.
I'll do so now.
Thank you. Moving on, I've completed the summary of the executive, administrative, and financial matters, but I do want to turn it over to Matt, Dr. Matt Kleiman, to report on not only the research partnership that he oversees on behalf of the commission, but he supervises all staff and really has kept the things moving along, and especially for this meeting. So turn it over to Matt for any thoughts, comments, reporting.
Thank you, Mark, and good morning, everyone. Just to reiterate a little bit what Mark mentioned about the transition to telecommuting from the office. Like most agencies or organizations, it was a rapid and quite an abrupt set of circumstances that led us to pivot very quickly. And as Mark mentioned, that our primary concern was the safety of all the staff, but I think there's a secondary component to that as well, which is we also had to consider the safety of any private and confidential data that we deal with. So while we were able to set up the infrastructure for telecommuting with computers, we had to work closely with the university and with others to make sure that any data and those who have approval to access that data was done in a way that preserved the confidentiality and our agreements with other partner agencies concerning that data. So that was a very important thing. And that process of getting set up took probably less than a week, and I think we were up and running very quickly. And as Mark said, we put into place a couple protocols that I think were very productive. The first was that each day, every staff member is to report to their supervisor what they plan to work on, and at the end of the day, report back what they worked on. And that provided the mechanism, what Mark alluded to, of providing to Mark and myself at the end of each week an overview of what the unit was able to accomplish at a holistic level that allowed Mark and I to assess if there were any gaps in the provision of services or the activities that staff were undertaking. I think that we have really leveraged the use of technology in the sense of internally and externally utilizing old and established technology, things like email and phone calls and teleconferences, but also utilizing these new forums like Zoom. We utilize internal to the commission something called Microsoft Teams, which is essentially easy to use video conferencing, but also a mechanism that's similar to like sending a text, but you receive it on your computer as opposed to on your phone. And so one of the things we've noticed is, in fact, staff may be communicating more with each other in this environment than they do when we're in the office. Of course, face-to-face meetings certainly have their advantages, and we miss out on that. Part of that transition that occurred, and Ryan, when he reports out on the outreach and education unit, will be, we had a lot of activities planned and meetings underway and scheduled prior to the COVID. That week, myself and a couple other folks were in Allegheny on a site visit, and then 2 days later, we determined that we were not going to be traveling anymore. And so I'll leave it to Ryan to explain some of the opportunities and ways that he's transitioned, his unit's transition, to really keep in constant contact with our stakeholders, providing these important trainings, seminars, and other opportunities. I think that one of the, a weird positive out of this is that we've been able to be a little more reflexive on some of our communication strategies, which dovetails with this communication strategy that Mark alluded to. Ryan also will be discussing some short training videos that are now posted on the website. So we're utilizing a different modality of reaching out to our stakeholders. We're providing these training and workshops via Zoom. And then I think that we continue to work and talk with other folks in different ways. And Mark is in constant communication, of course, with other agency partners. Just as a quick example, some efforts related to our ongoing work for the domestic violence pretrial risk assessment. Professor Rago and an assistant district attorney in Allegheny County talked to us about their ongoing work of implementing ODARA in Allegheny County. And we talked about the possibility of obtaining data, as well as what any efforts we would take to validate a tool when a county were to adopt that in the future. So we've been continuing to have these ongoing productive conversations, despite not being able to make face-to-face visits. Linked again to something Mark referenced earlier related to the communication strategy, I just want to highlight that this is something, while it may be delayed because of budgetary reasons, each unit is giving thoughtful consideration to the way that information is shared to the stakeholders, as well as how the information is currently stored and displayed on our website. And we're working on strategies that we can share with our consultant that we work with to better make this information available, have that make it more consistent and maybe more better sense for visitors to our website and user friendly, and how we can maybe leverage some of the news items. And anyone who has visited the site will notice, for example, we've posted a number of recent activities that Mark participated in, be it in podcasts, as well as a couple interviews related to risk assessment and other changes that are going on around the Commonwealth. I'd just like to highlight one other important aspect, and I think that for those who've been on the commission for a little bit, you know that we've had some structural reorganization. So for example, the data component has been removed or moved from the IT group over to the research group. And so I just wanted to briefly report out on some of the developments related to rethinking and our restructuring internally and some of the advantages that that's had. So when we think of our data, we're thinking about data in, how we collect the data, how we process that data, and then data out, how it's analyzed, how it's published and reported, either through the annual report, through research that we're conducting. That data is often shared with our research partners around the Commonwealth. So that data in component used to be part of the IT group. That's the thinking about how the information's entered into SGS Web, as well as then how it's downloaded and then prepared for the analyses. So by moving it to the research group, we think we have a more thoughtful perspective on ensuring the validity and the reliability of that data and the consistency of that information that goes into our analyses. But I think it's also created a great opportunity for communication between the units. So for example, if we have an amendment or an enhancement, those need to be reflected in SGS Web and the information that's being entered. The Education and Outreach Group is serving as a substantive expert to provide guidance to the IT and Applications Unit. And then the Research and Data Analysis Unit is also having discussions about how that information should be translated into the actual data elements that are in our database. So we really have a holistic perspective now on a lot of processes that are taking place. Other staff are certainly involved in those conversations. It's not just limited to those three units that I just mentioned. And additionally, I think because we've utilized or developed something called IT and applications process, that unit has been able to support some of those efforts I mentioned earlier, thinking about how to post those videos on the web, or at least develop those that we're developing through the outreach and education unit. But Christy Bundro in her report later will mention some of the efficiencies that she's found in relation to thinking about the tools that the commission utilizes and really asking why it is that we are engaged in different things that we're utilizing. So for example, we had a contract for some cloud space that was developed years ago. So the question is, do we need to utilize that framework anymore, or could there be cost savings by going in a different direction? We're also thinking critically about, we have what's called a SaaS BI portal, which is a business intelligence portal, which is a way that we can share data and information with our consumers or our stakeholders in an efficient and effective practice. That platform is a little antiquated and needs some refreshing. So we're working with the research unit is working with the IT and applications unit to be thinking of other alternatives. In this case, potentially the tool that Microsoft offers, that it's available through the University of Penn State. So it would be a natural transition for us, but we're able to now think critically, I think, a lot more about our operations to see if we can be more efficient and more effective in those operations. So I think that this is, while the COVID stuff has certainly been a disruptor for operations, getting back to what Mark said, coming out of that strategic plan, it was a temporary disruptor, and now I think we're continuing to fulfill our operations, but at a high level, and also in a creative and new way that I think will benefit us in the long term. So with that in mind, I'll turn it back to the chairman to introduce the unit managers for each of the divisions to talk about all of the work that they've been doing the last 3 months, which I think will support what Mark claimed about all of the efforts and tremendous work that's been done, even though, again, we've had this disruption in the short term. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt. And Mr. Chairman, I think first online with applications and information technology is Christy Bundro.
Thank you, Mark and Chairman Stevens, and good morning, everyone. I'll start by saying that the applications and information technology team has pretty much been fully engaged, even though we're working from home. Our team transitioned relatively smoothly to working remotely, but we're IT people, so it's probably been much easier for us to work virtually than the other units and many of you. One of the projects that we recently wrapped up and deployed to the SGS web production environment a couple of weeks ago were the modifications to support the sentencing alternative changes that were mandated by JRI 2 Act 115. With these changes, we eliminated CIP and SIP sentencing alternatives from the application, and we added probation with restrictive conditions. We also added eligibility fields for the state drug treatment program and eliminated the calculation of triple RI from SGS Web. There are a few additional impacts from the JRI 2 bill, such as short sentence parole and re-entry supervision, that will require additional changes in SGS Web, but they will be delivered in future projects. One of the unplanned outcomes of this project is that our team, which is, we're all relatively new, learned all about the integrations between SGS Web and applications hosted by other agencies. Both PCCD and JNet support applications that rely on data that's sourced from SGS Web. So we worked with these agencies to understand those processes so that we could identify and address the impacts from the JRI 2 bills, or from the JRI 2 changes, but we'll also be able to apply this knowledge to future projects. We've also been very busy implementing the resentencing guidelines. This new feature in SGS Web will include a new probation violation screen for users to record a criminal or technical violation prior to the resentencing hearing. So that will allow users to see the resentencing guidelines as well as produce a guideline form that includes the resentencing guidelines prior to the actual hearing. If you're interested in more information on those changes, in the supplemental materials, we've included our specifications document for the resentencing guidelines changes. Based on our current progress, we expect these changes to go live in July. The other SGS Web project that we currently have underway is sentence risk assessment. Our vendor, BrickSimple, had done extensive work on this last year. However, additional work is required to align what they implemented with the version of the sentence risk assessment instrument that was ultimately passed. At this point, we've identified what needs to change and have started the development work. And we are currently planning for those changes to go live in August. As far as future development projects, I mentioned earlier that some additional work will be needed for the JRI-2 bill, but we'll also have to implement changes for Amendment 6 once it's passed, the 8th edition guidelines and parole guidelines. As Mark mentioned during the policy meeting this morning, these last two will likely coincide with the full rebuild of SGS Web. A few of the projects on our plate are actually being driven by other agencies. AOPC is currently spearheading a project to expand OTN values, and JNet has recently re-engineered their OTN search web service. So both of these projects will require changes to SGS Web. And there are many other items on our list as well. I feel like every week something new comes up, like the federal criminal history access. So we have a lot of work to do. In addition to our development work, though, our team has taken over complete responsibility for the support and maintenance of the SGS Web application. The contract that we have with BrickSimple ends on June 30th. And right now, we currently have no need to extend beyond that. One of the benefits of moving from an external vendor to an internal team is that we bring a fresh perspective and we have different priorities. You know, we have a vested stake in making sure that we are running as efficiently as possible, as Matt mentioned earlier. To that end, we've already identified a few areas where we can reduce some cost. You know, we decided to relocate our development and training environments from the Rackspace hosting service to Penn State's virtual hosting platform. And this will reduce the annual expense for these environments from $17,000 to around $2,000. We also recently reviewed our support contract with JNet and identified a server that was not being actively used. So by decommissioning that server, we'll reduce our annual support fees by about $2,600. So it's not a huge amount of savings, but you know, always better to reduce costs where possible. As far as SGS Web usage, as of April 30th, 112,000 sentences have been submitted with 2019 dates of sentence, and 22,000 sentences have been submitted with 2020 dates of sentence. If you'd like to see more data, the sentences by county and year report is included in the supplemental materials. The last thing that I want to mention is that in addition to the SGS Web work that we do, another benefit of transitioning to an internal IT team is the informal technical support we provide to the other units. For example, we recently assisted the Education and Outreach unit with delivering the training informational videos that Matt mentioned, and I'm sure Ryan will speak about later. And we were also involved in researching the Zoom features to ensure that we could conduct our meeting today in a secure and efficient manner, while also allowing for public attendance. So since we haven't been Zoom bombed, I'll say that was successful. That's all I have. Are there any questions?
Hey, Christy, thank you. I just want to commend Christy again, as she mentioned, two big success stories, I think. One is transitioning application support and development in-house. This is something we've, as a commission, have discussed for years, and it's finally possible because of Christy and her team. They're just doing incredible work. And then, as both Christy and Matt mentioned, the real having an internal IT resource in terms of helping us think through process issues and deployment and so forth has been really incredible. So, and just this meeting, all of the work involved in arranging this webinar to address security concerns, to address legal issues that Professor Mystic had raised, any number of things. It really, it's a blessing to have that in-house, and it's a real, we're seeing real dividends from that investment. So thank you, Christy, and thank you, Commission.
Thank you.
I think with that, unless there are any questions, next in line is Dr. Eric Milzik, the Manager of Research and Data Analysis.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark. Representative Stevens, good afternoon, everyone. Like IT, and frankly, with a significant amount of help from the IT unit, the Research and Data Analysis team has transitioned into remote work quickly and with really no loss of output. So the first research project that I'm going to discuss is the PCCD Projections Grant. So the Commission is a member of the Correctional Population Projections Committee, and that seeks to create forecasting for correctional populations with a real focus on resource needs extending from 3 to 5 years in the future. So the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency Projections Grant allows us to pursue that kind of projection model. So the focus of the grant is the impact on these state resources. And that's based on the changes and revisions made to the sentencing guidelines, other criminal justice related trends that have changed over time, and just to help track these kind of sentencing trends and changes. So this is based on 4 modules that are being developed in the Simulate Projections program. Early forecasting of sentences, impact of sentencing guideline revisions, parole guideline and state parole recommendation ranges, and probation guidelines, revocations, and resentencing. It basically predicts the different changes based on arrests, based on sentencing policies. It just allows us to kind of see the impact of the legislative changes and how it'll affect all these different populations. So the grant is scheduled to end on the 30th of June of this year. However, due to the large number of changes that are really required in the model by Act 115 of 2019, we've submitted an extension request in order to extend the grant to the 31st of December. Since the last commission meeting, staff have expanded Module 2 significantly and are very close to its completion. Now, a lot of that is based on the inclusion of offense gravity scores based on the prior record scores and statutory limits. Ultimately, the goal of these modules is to reproduce the real system, just so that we can get as close as possible to how things actually go through the system and make these projections based on that. So the model generates the minimum and maximum prison sentences based on the sentence guideline ranges for each given offense, and it tracks them all and basically counts up the total aggregate based on each individual calculation on a case-by-case basis. So Module 2 now also projects the quantity of sentences for state prison, for probation, and for county jail. So this is all accomplished by the model, which again reproduces the criminal justice process and the sentencing process, how it goes through the system. And it also introduces that temporal component, so how long it takes in each phase of the system. So the staff have begun development of Module 3, and Module 3 is in a lot of ways an extension of the second module, which has the increased scope that includes parole interviews, releases, revocations with return to prison, as well as modeling probation violations and revocations. Again, just really seeks to further explore the entire system and reproduce everything so that it'll be as close as possible to actual when we try and see how legislative changes are going to impact things. So the next project is the role of substance use on revocation and resentencing practices. So this is the Vital Strategies project. Now, this is an ongoing study that's related to resentencing of substance-dependent individuals, tracking how technical violations and new offenses are being considered when such individuals are being resentenced. So while the PCCD grant tries to reproduce the system in order to show how changes will affect the population, the Vital Strategies project is more exploratory, trying to understand how we go about looking for best practices for treatment and for substance use and treatment related issues. So to accomplish that, as Matt had already said, we recently made a trip to Allegheny County, meeting with key stakeholders. We got that database, which includes closed probation cases from 2019. So this will help us understand at the quantitative level how individuals under probation who tested for substance abuse are being treated, how technical violations were handled, basically how it works within the system. So we plan to present some of this at the public hearings, and we'll share some of these results most likely at the next commission meeting. Once again, Matt already talked about the pretrial domestic violence risk assessment in the ODARA. So I'll just say on that, we're still continuing to consider how we would implement it, considering issues of the validation process. And that's everything from how we would collect the data, what tool we would use, how much data would be required in order to properly validate it and to test for things like fairness and equality throughout the tool. Looking at other research done both on the ODARA as well as other risk assessments to see what those measures are and how we can ensure that not only that it works, but it works fairly and equally throughout the different populations. With the state intermediate punishment evaluation, this is, again, as discussed, the new state drug treatment program. Showed significant promise when you look at recidivism rates within 3 years. Those who completed the program successfully were found to have significantly lower recidivism rates than those who were either expelled or never became involved in the program. So we already submitted part 1 and we are working on part 2 of the data. We're exploring some new avenues of methodology, in part because this is the culmination of nearly 15 years of SIP work. So we're planning to have part 2 ready for your consideration and review by the September meeting. As far as the parole project, again, Mark went over this in some detail, so I'll just recap this quickly, that based on this matrix, which we have the 3x3 grid, one for violent, one for nonviolent offenders, we give the grant or refuse parole recommendations based on our measures. Since the last meeting, the commission staff have updated the parole preparedness scale to remove the factor for historical violent misconducts. And that was, as we discussed in the last meeting, anything that occurred longer than 12 months prior to the parole interview. And staff have also recalibrated the preparedness scale to adjust for this change. On the subject of data management, we are continuing to work with the IT unit and continuing to work with a lot of other units within the commission to prepare for SGS web definition changes, for changes to data collection and updates. A lot of this is to ensure that the updates that are made through the collection tools and through updated sentencing guidelines are reflected in the data. And they're reflected in the data that we use for our own internal research, as well as what we disseminate through our data set and data reports requests. So a lot of this is to make sure that the values which may or may not change can be applied retroactively to make sure that we can continue to use appropriate trend analysis. And I'm very happy to kind of echo some of what Matt said before, that you know, we had a fairly sizable issue trying to make sure in our transition to remote work that the data is protected. So we deal with a lot of sensitive information, and we have the duty and responsibility, as Matt said, not only to our criminal justice partners, but the citizens of the Commonwealth itself who trust us with the data. And through a lot of help from the IT unit as well as Penn State, we've been able to both use all of our data as we would normally throughout the research process with no loss of output, but also protect that data through everything from encryption, hard drives, VPN, scrubbing databases of identifiers. So I'm very happy to say that we're able to continue to use the data with virtually no impact without compromising any of its security. Now, furthermore, we are also continuing to be very responsive to dataset requests, still working with numerous criminal justice partners and academics, making sure that our data continues to flow and our research continues to flow outward. And as, again, Matt had said, we are still continuing several very beneficial partnerships with Penn State as well as our criminal justice partners to make sure that our information is providing the meaningful evidence-based changes that we're looking for. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Eric. I don't know if there were any questions or. All right, if not, we can move to education outreach and Ryan Myers.
All right, well, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mark and Matt. You've touched base on a number of the items that I'm going to cover, so I guess I could be even shorter than I usually am on these updates. But I just, if you have the notebook for the members, if you have the notebook in front of you, the highlights that I'll overview are on pages 23 through 25. If you want some of the specific details, I'll try to pick up on the high points. As Matt and both Mark noted, we have been active even in this time of transition, and I'll unpack that transition beyond just from a commission staff perspective, because as you know, we are the education outreach unit, so we engage in a big way with the county court systems. And so we weren't only dealing with our transition to remote work, but also every county court system going remote, and sort of seeing a period of time for maybe about 2 weeks while counties shifted to remote services, really limited operations. So I think for about 2 weeks it was pretty silent, which allowed us to actively and effectively transition as a unit. But I think a takeaway there is the counties have really transitioned well and are picking up steam. And I think, you know, I don't like to use the phrase or the term new normal because I don't know that we're there yet. But we are certainly living in a space now with the counties that they're very active, and we're seeing a lot of inquiries regarding the guidelines and sentencing just generally from counties where we probably didn't see that in March and early April. So that's good news from us from an outreach standpoint. So I'll just hit on some high points here. I think one of the obvious and probably biggest efforts that we have from the unit's perspective is we've been calling it our 2020 county tour. And last time that we were all together in, I believe it was early March, we had already visited about 17 counties, maybe a little less counties, a couple were doubled up, but 15 to 17 in-person meetings at that time. And we initially had scheduled 61 counties for meetings to discuss all of the things that Mark spent the policy committee overviewing. And so that was a really good turnout for us in response rate. As we know, we had to change, and the restrictions in place greatly impacted our ability to meet in person. I think the takeaway here is, and I'll use a term Matt used earlier, is that the unit pivoted well through the transition. And as counties got to their new operations, we found that they were still really interested in hearing the information and engaging in Zoom meetings and Skype meetings and GoToMeeting. I think I have every virtual application downloaded on my computer and have attended and engaged in all of them at this point. So, you know, up until now, we've held 36 or met with 36 counties. At the end of last week, I can tell you we have a meeting tomorrow in Butler County, and I think we have 5 or so meetings next week. And as Mark had noted, our commutes have gotten a lot shorter. So it's amazing how I can be on the west side of the state in the morning and the east at lunchtime. So I think that's actually allowed us to be pretty effective in communicating with counties. And some takeaways then, just not from a metric standpoint, but really, you know, what are we doing? We can say, look, we've been meeting with this many counties, but what's the takeaway for you as commission members and for us as staff is that, one, they're well received. I think it's a really good foundation for us as staff to be engaging in this way with the counties. And, you know, Mark outlined 4 to 6 proposals and future changes that require us to be actively working with counties moving forward to implement these things. I know you've heard me say it before. I talk a lot about policy implementation, successful implementation, and that I didn't want to see our unit engage in such a large effort and have it as a one-off. So another takeaway is, yeah, we've met with 36 counties, but at this point, I think we have 4 to 6 counties already scheduled for follow-up meetings after that initial one. So that's already showing that, you know, we're coming back to the counties and working with the counties to determine how to implement all of these policies, but also talk about the changes with JRI2 and what does, you know, CIP funding and all of that look like moving forward. So I just think that's another really big takeaway. And then the last big takeaway on the county meetings, at least for our time today, is, you know, we've been promoting in a big way best practices. And we get the privilege of meeting with every county ultimately to learn from them. And we can pass that information along to other counties, either similarly situated by size or by case type. And what our focus is the use of SGS Web, right? We just heard Christy talk about SGS Web. You heard Mark talk about the engagement around building out SGS Web. And from a policy side, we really do promote the use of SGS Web early in the process. And as I noted back in March, and as I was looking over the meeting minutes for today, you know, this is requiring some counties to look at their practices and their processes for the first time in a long time and make some real changes. And so, look, they're not always easy conversations in the counties to come in and say, you know, here's a change, and this change will fundamentally impact your operations if you do nothing. And it'll fundamentally impact your operations if you do something, you know, and try to promote that best practice. But they're really helpful. They've been fruitful discussions, and I've been engaged in most every single one of them. And I've been encouraged by the county's willingness to change. I think over time, we got the sense that maybe they wouldn't want to, and maybe they still don't want to, but they're certainly engaging in a big way and looking to change. And I just think that's encouraging from a broader takeaway of these meetings. So I'll just keep moving on and talk about some of the other activities of the commission, because certainly I could spend an hour telling you and reporting out on all of the county meetings, but we have been doing other things as well. And on page 23, if you're looking at the notebook, you'll see other presentations and activities. And, you know, we do a lot of standard trainings, a lot of engagement with bar associations and other entities, state agencies, the DOC, AOPC, and we've been able to continue in those. We do it remotely now, but we have been able to stay relevant in that arena. And I think the information that we have to provide to practitioners and to the public generally is really important and timely information. So I'm happy that we've been looked at from those agencies to come in. Initially, I think it was maybe to fill some voids for them, and it's been really good for us because we've been able to continue to build on relationships that we've had with these agencies and associations. And I'm hopeful that that continues. It's certainly, as I mentioned, the remote nature of it, while I do believe there's a lot that you miss when you're not in person, it does allow us to be in more places more frequently and often. Although I found out that I couldn't be in 2 places at one time, even with all of this technology the other day in a Lehigh and Northampton County. So we'll have to figure that out moving forward. And then just from a response of sort of customer service aspect that we have here in the unit, we started to see more calls. Like I mentioned, they were down initially, but as counties transitioned, we are starting to see more and more calls and returning to that normal response rate that we have. And you'll see those numbers on the information in front of you. The next thing I'll talk about is just some of the education and outreach webpage changes. And again, Mark and Matt hit on these already. And I just wanted to spend a moment to say, here's another opportunity for us from an outreach, an education and outreach perspective to engage in a way we haven't engaged before. And since Matt's joined the commission staff, both Matt and I have spent a lot of time talking about these efforts, and up until recently hadn't done a lot around it for good reason, but hadn't done a lot around it. And this provided an opportunity. And so if you go to the commission's website, you can see that there's been some online video modules posted. I had talked about these guiding principles before, and so we posted something on that. We posted some information on Amendment 5, again, relevant and timely. We have a number of modules in the works right now, and we'll hopefully be posting 2 to 4 more here in the next couple of weeks. So I think that they are helpful, and they're short, intended to be 15 or less minutes, even less than that, 10 minutes. And it just gives us an opportunity to keep posting fresh material, in timely material, and tell practitioners across the state about the changes. You've heard over the last, 3 hours now, all of the work of the commission and changes. And so I think that's a really nice place for us to provide that information. And then you'll also see that there's a note about digital media, and we just use the opportunity to promote some of the work that our executive director has done over time on the website. But you could see it coming from other members, other staff members, and also certainly members of the commission, and a place for us to post material. The last 2 bullets there are just to say we continue to work on a number of items, and my hope is by September I can take the word continue out and just say here's the work that was done, and show you all of the behind the scenes efforts from staff in the unit. If you access the commission's website and look at reference materials, all of those reference materials need to be updated to reflect Amendment 5, to reflect all of the changes of JRI 2, to reflect all of the modifications to SGS web application. And so it takes an enormous effort to review those. I appreciate that our commission members picked up on the word shall, and how often does that occur in the guidelines and so forth. So you can imagine that's the same effort that we're looking at when we need to replace and change terminology and reference material for practitioners across the state. And then the last thing on the slide that I'll cover before turning it back is just that, we are really engaged with Christie's unit around SGS Web. And while we are certainly not the IT folks, and it's not in our label for our unit, we provide a practitioner's perspective to the use of SGS Web. And we also provide a policy understanding of the guidelines. And so we work closely with Christy and her team as modifications are developed and then we can test them from our unit from a practitioner standpoint. And I say that because the unit is made up of individuals who have worked in the county court systems and who have worked with SGS Web and the guidelines. And so, we bring that knowledge, at least to the commission from a staff perspective, to say, why does this click this way, or maybe we could do it a different way. So that's just been really great. And another reason why having the IT shop in-house has been really beneficial to us. So I'm going to turn it back, and I'll just, my parting words would be, in summary of all of what I said, I think the unit, and then ultimately, because I think we're an extension of you all, the commission members, we're remaining active out there. I think we're remaining relevant to individuals. You've heard me use the phrase engaged in a big way throughout this time. We've really worked hard to build positive relationships with the counties so that we can talk about the policies moving forward. And at the end of the day, I think we are actually seeing some change from counties to implement best practices. So I'll go back to being the Wizard of Oz. And,
well, first, thank you, Ryan. And I want to add just a point or two. If the members will remember back in December and actually prior to that, when the commission was really focused on communicating well to counties, things like risk assessment and new guidelines, we had committed to spending the first 6 months of this year getting to every county. And just to give you a sense, when we're talking about a county meeting, it's not just 1 or 2 people. These had been CLE approved, CJE approved sessions where you might have 70 or 80 people, and it's a big undertaking. 2-hour CLE plus an hour of discussion on things like SGS Web. So it's been a huge engagement, and we were on track to do 67 county visits during the first 6 months. And even with all of this disruption, as Ryan indicated, we're on track. We may not hit July 1st with 67 counties, but we'll be very close. And as Ryan said, it's not just a one-time hit. These are deep discussions that lead to follow-up meetings and I think better practices. And so I think this re-engagement with counties is great. We have to do more of it because of all the things on our agenda. But I want to credit Ryan and his team for really sticking to it and working through the details. And I think they've really delivered for the commission in this area. So I don't know if there's any comments or questions.
Just maybe one more point, and I apologize for not mentioning it. We had a really productive and engaging, exciteful discussion with Judge Dowley's County Northampton, I believe about a week or so ago. And I don't say this because he's a commission member and that he's here and he can hear me and see me, but I do say that of all of the meetings that we've had, it certainly ranks up there for one of the most engaged discussions around the use of SGS Web, risk assessment, and it surpassed well beyond the hour afterwards. And I think individuals from Judge Dowley's county stuck around for about a 2 to 2.5 hour discussion afterwards. And so, I bring that up as an example of how beneficial these meetings can be. And we'll be following up with Judge Dowley and Northampton County to continue discussions and work. But it was a good time. So I just wanted to make sure I made sure I said that, Judge. Thank you.
And yeah, this is Judge Dowley. And thank you, Ryan. The presentation was well done and well received. And I've received requests for follow-up, so I'll be in touch with you on that. But thank you again.
Great, thank you both. And to close us out, we partnered with the AOPC and with Villanova to do a continuing legal education for judges. And Ryan can tell me what the number was, but it was more than 100 judges, I believe. And it was a 4-hour presentation, 2-hour segments, two 2-hour segments. But it was a really great thing with DOC, the AOPC, and Villanova, along with the commission. So, Ryan, do you recall the number of judges?
Yeah, I believe we were around 150 to 165. And I would just note that I'm not sure if Diana Woodside from the DOC is still with us here right now, but she also participated. I know she was on the meeting earlier this morning, and so I just wanted to recognize her as well.
Great, thanks. With that, I think we'll move over to the final report out, and that is on policy. I'm going to ask Dr. Diane Shoop to start us off, and then we'll move to the voting items that we covered during the policy meeting this morning. Diane?
Yes. So first turning to legislation, beyond what we discussed this morning on new and modified offenses, there's nothing enacted. Senate Bill 275 was presented to the governor on the 28th of May. I anticipate that'll probably be signed. That makes F1 strangulation a crime of violence. So the only change to our guidelines then would be prior record score would change to a 4. It does change the definitions in some other offenses that have to do with crimes of violence, but it wouldn't make any changes to our offense listing. The projections committee typically meets in the summer. I haven't heard a date yet for that, but we did use our projections model last year, the first model, which looks at MDJ and municipal court data, what's carried over to common pleas and then convictions. We made use of that, and the Department of Corrections also used that. We will have to do resource utilization for whenever we adopt the recommitment ranges and the new guidelines. So hopefully modules 2, 3, and 4, we can use those. Turning to the annual report, we've been working to update the look of the report, and we've been very fortunate to have House of Representatives staff working with us on that. We're making the content a little bit more relevant and very directly related to our mandates, as well as describing all the work that we undertake. We're trying to make the tables much more user-friendly. So we have a draft done based on a preliminary annual report data. We're waiting to finish it when we have the final data set, and that'll happen after judge verification. And to that end, we have a very large project underway. We're looking at convictions reported in the CPCMS data and comparing that to what's in SGS Web and looking at any deficiencies, which we'll go back to the judges and counties on. And the completeness and the accuracy is really important. First, it gives us a true picture of sentencing practices, and people look to us to see what's going on in the world of sentencing. We use that data in projections, impact analysis, and research, and so we want the most complete and accurate data for that. And also, we reduce end user burden by using the information again in resentencing and parole. We re-pull that information, so we want everything there and as accurate as possible. But very importantly, it becomes a really critical piece of information for this compliance certification. We want to make sure the counties are reporting all their sentences. Are they compliant with the sentencing guidelines and their CIP plans? And of course, as Mark mentioned, funding's tied to that. So we want to work with the counties and make sure they're getting all their information in. We're doing a little bit of analysis as well, looking at when sentences are actually, when offenses are sentenced, and how long it takes to report those into SGS Web. And we're looking at the missing OTNs, trying to look if there's any patterns to that, or there's certain types of offenses, certain times of the year. So we'll turn all that information over to Ryan's unit to help work with the counties and better report their data. And I think we already talked about the model pretrial domestic violence risk assessment. I did want to mention that we did make some recommendations for modifications to statute to update the validation to be statewide and every 3 years, and to change the definition of predictive bias to more of standard under the curve recommendation rather than a little more subjective definition. I think that's it, Mark.
Great. Thank you, Diane. Appreciate that. We're now going to move to the voting items, and this is picking up on our 2-hour discussion this morning, primarily about the 4 proposals. So what I'd suggest is I will announce the issue and give a quick overview, and then turn it to Representative Stevens for a vote on each of these. Remember that what we're trying to do is put before the commission proposals for approval And then we will talk about scheduling public hearings and how we do that for these 4 matters sometime this summer, so that then during the September meeting, they'd be situated that the commission, if it chose to, could adopt at that time and submit to the General Assembly. So the first proposal is the Amendment 6 to the sentencing guidelines. And the Amendment 6 incorporates the Act 115 changes, the JRI 2 changes. It also includes some basic restructuring or refinement of the omnibus offense gravity score and some changes regarding to enhancements. And then it also incorporates in a big way some additional contextual information about the commission having advisory guidelines, and also incorporating the probation guidelines, the probation with restrictive condition guidelines, and the identification of eligibility for the various Department of Corrections programs.
All right. So is there a motion to approve Amendment 6 of the sentencing guidelines as was presented during the policy committee hearing and as summarized by Mark in his recitation there?
So moved.
All right, Representative McClinton, is there a second?
I'll second. Judge Bernstein.
Great, thanks, Judge. All right, it's been moved in second. Is there any discussion or any questions? Are there any negative votes? All right, hearing none, the motion passes.
Great, thank you. Moving to the second proposal, this is for resentencing guidelines amendment 1. The changes are 2. One is to remove county intermediate punishment and state intermediate punishment and replace CIP with probation with restrictive conditions. And the second issue is to echo the provision in statute that the court should give consideration to any time spent under the original sentence.
All right, is there a motion to approve the resentencing guidelines as
Judge
discussed?
Tucker, so moved.
Who was that?
Judge Tucker, so moved.
Thanks, Judge. Is there a second?
Rago, second.
All right, thanks, Professor Rago. It's been moved in second. Is there any conversation or any discussion, questions? Hearing none. Are there any negative votes? Having heard no negative votes, the motion passes.
Great, thank you. The third proposal is for state parole guidelines. As we discussed this morning, the state parole guidelines take into account 2 key factors. One factor is the risk assessment as required by statute. The second key factor are preparedness factors, and we provided information on the scale that's used for that. And then included in it are a number of override factors that address statutory or other issues common for decisions going opposite of what's recommended.
All right, is there a motion to approve the state parole guidelines?
So moved.
Thanks, Judge Marsico. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Is that Judge Daly?
I think Attorney Marsico.
Oh, was it Attorney Marsico? All right. Now you're really throwing me. All right, any discussion, any questions? Are there any negative votes? Hearing none, the motion carries.
Thank you. And the fourth proposal is the proposal for state parole recommitment ranges. The focus of this is for convicted parole violators, so new offenses, and linking the most serious of the new offenses to the offense gravity score value, and then using that as the basis for advisory guidelines for back time consideration.
All right, is there a motion to approve the state parole recommitment ranges?
I will so motion.
Thank
Judge
you,
Bernstein.
Thank you, Judge Bernstein. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, DA Sunday. All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion or questions? All right, are there any negative votes? Hearing none, the motion is adopted.
Thank you. And then the final matter, and I'm not sure this requires a vote, but I'll throw it to the chair, and that is on the procedures for county certification of compliance. Staff is recommending that we put together a proposal for the commission to consider in September, but in the interim, compile all the information identified in the statute and make sure that we're providing that to president judges. And then if the commission adopts some type of more formal certification process, that can be adopted during September, and then we would communicate that to judges as well.
I mean, I'll throw it up to the commission for discussion. My gut reaction is to let you move forward with the procedures you've outlined, and then once we've got something formally established, we could move on that in September. But I don't know if any other commission members have thoughts or objections to that approach.
This is Judge Tucker. Mr. Chairman, I agree with you.
Great.
This is Rep. McClinton. I also agree with you, Chairman.
All right. All right. Well,
This is Judge Dow. I just have a question. The certificate of compliance, well, we're talking about September, that data has to start being collected as of July 1, correct?
Well, Judge, I think, yeah, it's a really good question. PCCD's advisory committee has not met yet. So the committee that's supposed to be reviewing this hasn't met, and they're already sort of behind the cycle for approving funding. So I think, as I understand it, and I think we have a meeting scheduled next week, the initial meeting. As I understand it, I think the idea this round is to just keep to the prior commitments. So basically just status quo funding for this round. But I think, you know, our commission needs to at least be able to communicate to courts what the expectations would be around a certification of compliance. And most of our data is annual data. And so what I was envisioning was we would, as part of the data collection and cleaning that we're doing right now, we would report out to president judges later this year, maybe before the September meeting, but certainly at or after the September meeting, the information that would have been used if this year's data, if last year's data, 2019 data was part of the mix. So compliance with reporting, compliance with the guidelines, those kind of things. And we would say, here's the information that we'll be using, here's the format of the information we'll use for next year for the cycle. I would anticipate that PCCD would want a certification of compliance from the commission probably in the first quarter or early second quarter of next year, and it would be based on 2020 sentencing practices. So I think the timeline we talked about in continuing to gather this stuff, come up with a formulation for the September meeting, and then communicating that all to PJ so that they're aware of it, because the following, you know, March or April, we would be certifying counties. That would be a structure that I'm thinking about.
All right, so it sounds like we don't need to take any action on that issue.
Great, thank you. Then we'll move and we'll bring something back during the September meeting. The final issue, and this is, I don't know if we need a vote, but as we're thinking about the public hearings for the 4 proposals, there's a lot of different approaches to this, and part of this is we don't know, you know, whether we should or could have public hearings as we normally do, or if we do something like this with Zoom. We've investigated the technology. We can clearly do remote meetings like this, or we could do some combination of the two. So I guess I'd ask for a little bit of flexibility in the commission directing what we can do. I can give you some sort of boundaries. One is that the earliest we would publish these proposals would be in the Pennsylvania Bulletin on June 27th. That's the earliest. And then we have about a 3-week window of opportunity. So we could publish on Saturday the 27th. It'll probably be Friday the 3rd of July or Saturday the 11th of July. And if we publish any of those 3 days, then we would be able to hold public hearings prior to the September meeting, because we have to give notice, wait 30 days, have the public hearing, and have the public hearings within 60 days of the notice. So we have a 30-day window. So I just sort of point that out, that we would be looking at having hearings in, the earliest would be, I think, the 26th of August, and the latest would be the 9th of September. And it seems to me we have a couple weeks until we figure out what that looks like, if it's a combination, and maybe that would be the approach. We identify a site, we also allow Zoom, and if at the end we can't be at the site, at least we have Zoom. So that's the one issue. And then the other issue is, should we sort of combine these in some way? For instance, it seems to make sense that even if we do it by Zoom, maybe we have multiple hearings on Amendment 6 and include in that the resentencing guidelines. And maybe we have 1 or 2 hearings on the parole guidelines and include with that one the recommitment ranges, because they're sort of topically separate. There may be a benefit, even if it's by Zoom, to having 2 hearings and to do separate hearings on those 2 different areas. So that's sort of what we were thinking about, but this is new space for all of us. So I just wanted to throw it back to the commission to get some guidance on how you want to proceed.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Look, who knows what the situation is going to be like, right? And you're talking within a month?
Yes.
In three or 4 weeks?
Yeah, we'd have to decide you're right, in the next several weeks about how we're going to proceed.
I guess
This is Judge Bernstein. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Representative Stevens.
No, I mean, the only thing I was going to ask, Judge Tucker, are your courts open? I mean, what's the status of your court right now?
Well, right now we're closed. We expect to be open on Monday, but only to judges, not open to the public. We'll be doing hearings by way of Zoom and remotely.
Okay. So it might be ambitious to think that within a month we'd be able to have the public into a courtroom in any kind of capacity, right? I mean,
I would doubt very seriously if the public will be allowed in that capacity. Nonetheless, you'll have social distancing and physical distancing, and it will be problematic.
Yeah.
Getting in through security and what have you, it will be very problematic.
All right, go ahead, Judge Bernstein.
Okay, yeah. So my thought is, not only are places opening up at different times and to different degrees, but we're in a national experiment. So we may look good for 6 weeks or 7 weeks, and then come the end of August having a spike. So if we have the capacity to do it, it seems to me, and we had to do this sort of with some of our hearings, is make that determination for something in the future. So if we can successfully do it, I know it's a little more difficult, and prevent people from coming together and guarantee that we're going to be able to have set dates, and then we're going to be able to open it up to the public without limitation. It seems to me we go forward with that route. And the worst thing that happens is we go that route and we would have been able to have some or all in person. So my thoughts for what they're worth.
I think that's really helpful. And we could proceed with the idea that these are going to be Zoom webinars like this. And we've talked through the protocol that we could put in place to make that work. And then as a fallback, if we needed it, we could always designate commission offices as physical places if by that time there was some ability. I mean, if we needed a physical place for the meeting in addition to Zoom. But if Zoom is primary, that would be fine as long as council thinks that's doable.
I think we should designate a time and place certain, a physical venue for the hearing, and then we'll augment it with the Zoom technology.
Okay, and we could make that our 2 offices. If we do 2 hearings for each, just the State College and Harrisburg office for each, but Zoom would be the primary modality.
would work.
Mark, people also have the ability to just send in their comments, right?
Absolutely. And we always publish that with the materials that in fact, we encourage people to submit comments or testimony, even if they're going to comment. So, and we would provide all members with the draft before we would publish it. But yeah, that would be very, very clear. Yep.
Okay. All right. So, so do you need a motion to this effect? I mean,
I don't think, unless there's any strong, as long as there's consensus with this sort of approach, and we find some dates, and maybe we'll do a doodle poll or whatever to see if there's particular dates or times that are of interest to members, just to make sure, again, members don't have to be here, but it's always great if members can participate in some of these hearings, and it might be easier with Zoom anyhow. So we can send around a poll to try to find best times and dates, and then just move on this.
all right. Yeah, I mean, I get the challenges on the remote testimony. Although at work today, I mean, NISA was, I mean, you know, clear. We were able to get a question answered and everything else like that. So it's the limitations in which we live. Sure.
Right. Okay, then I'll just proceed based on this discussion.
All right.
The final thing I have is I just want to recognize staff again, and particularly Jadine and Kathy for all of their work in putting this together, getting materials out to you and posting stuff, and you know, just a lot. And then with you know, sort of our support team here of Ryan and Christy, making sure that we've made this happen. So this was our first test at this, and I just appreciate everyone's patience with it. I think we accomplished what we needed to do, and it was helpful to staff at least. So with that, I turn it back to the chair for closing the meeting.
You know, and I hate to do this because I just had a thought that I wanted to throw out there for the group. I know you mentioned that there's a YouTube channel stood up for the commission now. Ryan mentioned that.
There is.
Does anyone have any thoughts about whether it would be worthwhile to post this meeting since it's being recorded on that YouTube channel? I mean, I'm all about transparency and trying to really spread the word about the commission and the work that we're doing, and just throw that out there for the group, for the commission members in discussion to see whether they think that might be worthwhile.
Rago here. I think particularly the discussion from the representative senator on transparency and the concerns that they expressed when we started our meeting, I think it would be good, I think, if the commission's heard that way. So I'd appreciate that if you think we could do that, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
From the staff point of view, we'll look into that. As you mentioned, we do have a channel now, and we want to give content. So assuming that this that what we have captured on this on this recording works in that venue, we can make it happen. And you know, we'll split it between the policy meeting and this formal commission meeting. I don't know if there's any, you know, bandwidth issues or things like that, but we'll get our crack staff like Christy on top of this, and I'm sure if there's a solution, we'll find it.
All right. All right. Well, is there any other business that anyone wants to raise for the commission? All right. Then we stand adjourned until September.